Welcome to The Liberation Effect with me, your host, Helen Villas. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Liberation Effect. Today, we are going slightly off course, and the guest that I have with me today is actually somebody called Erin. And Erin, if you are a Facebook group member, you will recognize them as a moderator extraordinaire. But also, Erin is training to be a therapist at the moment. So we've been asking for questions from group members, from people on my Facebook page, for us to answer in this space, really, with Erin is going to ask me questions that you might have that you don't get to ask because you're a bit like a ghost when you listen to a podcast and you're going, what is that? What does that mean? And so, so Erin is going to be all of the listeners' representative, as well as having a therapeutic angle. Does that feel all right, Erin? Does that summarize it properly?
Yeah, and I'll do my best to try and fit into that as much as I can.
Well, there's no conditions here. You're allowed to just be yourself and just ask what comes. So what's the first question we've got?
All right, let's jump straight in. So it's, how do I balance my narcissistic mother in my life while trying to heal from the CPTSD?
That's really tricky. So first, I think if I clarify what we mean when we say CPTSD, we're talking about complex post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD itself is usually applied to kind of shorter term exposure to trauma in terms of people that have gone to war, had a car crash, something very significant, like as an event. That can be longer term exposure, but it's more likely going to then tip into CPTSD. And CPTSD is usually a response to emotional abuse. Physical abuse will trigger PTSD. And the thing that differentiates them is that in PTSD, it's characterized by visual flashbacks. And in CPTSD, it's emotional flashbacks, what we might call triggers. So if you are experiencing something that feels familiar from childhood that led to either abandonment, punishment, shame, humiliation, you will have an emotional flashback and try and remove yourself. You'll become triggered. So your whole body will activate. Your brain will go, danger, 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 threat, 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 get out, get out, get out. And they're really debilitating experiences. I think the thing that's really also very important to know is that it's not an official diagnosis as of yet. It's not in the DSM and it's not in the ICD. Doesn't mean it's not used and applied, and people do, as in psychologists will diagnose it. But it's important to know that those parameters aren't really well defined in terms of what each clinician might be looking for. But it is significant, and it is, I definitely see it in my client group, and it's pretty debilitating as an experience, especially relationally. So then, if CPTSD is characterized by emotional flashbacks and triggers, and you are still being exposed to the person that may well have caused those initial wounds, it's going to be very difficult to heal from it. It's a high expectation of ourselves to think that we could do that. It's that thing of you can't heal in the environment that hurt you because you're constantly being exposed. And if you're expecting that analogy of the plant that's in the soil, we don't berate the plant for not growing. We change the soil that they're in. And this is a case of soil changing, perhaps. What do you think?
So if the trauma happened when they were younger or as a child, and this has created CPTSD, what stops a person from being able to recognize that they're not that child anymore?
Well, that's just your brain's survival system. Basically, it's your brain can't really differentiate between real and imagined threat. So, like when, I don't know if you do this, but I do this, watch scary movies, I can become activated in it because it will be, I wouldn't say triggering, but because maybe I've had shock things or scary things happen, seeing it happen in front of me, even though it's on a screen, and logically in my prefrontal cortex, I know it's just a film, I know it's not real, I know it's all made up, that will still feel really real to me as an event when I'm seeing scary things on the film.
So it actually physically disrupts your nervous system.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
your brain basically goes into survival mode.
And that's what this person is experiencing when they're around their mother.
Yes. So if, for example, there is a wound around rejection, I mean, everyone with a narcissistic parent is going to have not good enough wound, right? Or rejection wound. Even if they've been told they're the best in the world, from an enmeshed parent, they're going to still have the not good enough fear because their value was always based on being the best, right? So there's always going to be this not good enough wound. So then anything where you make a mistake, you get a criticism, it's perceived as a threat because that then led to either abandonment, punishment, shame, humiliation, and criticism and rejection. So it's always going to be present. But your brain is amazing at how it responds to threat. In that, we go into fight, flight, freeze. Fawn, if you've seen my episode about that, the newsletter about that, is for me a secondary response. It's not a primary response. And in fact, I would even argue that freeze is the very first response. And then our brain goes fight or flight, and then it goes fawn. So we go, because if you think about any situation you've ever been in where it's been a bit scary, you go, and then you go into whatever action you're going to take, as in fight or flight. Fawn is the response of choice for children because they have very little other option. That if they were to flight, they'll get chased or punished differently. And if they fight, they will lose and physically, they're in danger potentially. So they can't really fight and they can't really flight. So they have to fawn. And so it becomes this kind of choice that our brain makes. Well, I haven't got fight or flight, so I have to fawn, right?
It's what then develops into people-pleasing stuff.
100%. And this is that's a really interesting thing because we call it fawning in this space, but then it's people pleasing in that space. And they're the same thing.
Yes.
Right. And actually, hyper-independence is exactly the same as hypo-independence, right?
What do you mean?
Well, we're going down a right old rabbit hole already.
We'll come back.
Two ADHD people in the same space. Yes, both are doing exactly the same thing. They are both trying to avoid intimacy, and they are both trying to control the relationships around them and what intimacy is allowed and the perception of them. Person. They're trying to avoid rejection, both of them.
By either not engaging in intimacy in the first place.
Yeah. Well, neither of them are engaging in intimacy. People pleasing isn't intimacy. To be intimate, you have to reveal your true self. You have to be vulnerable. You have to show your real thoughts, your real feelings, your real beliefs, values, and ideologies, right? But if you're a people pleaser or you're hyper independent, you're going to hide those things either from the thinking of that lets people into my inner world too much and I don't want them, so I'm keeping them out, hyper independent, or from if I disagree with them or if I show anything that disagrees with theirs, they'll reject me. So I'll just tell them what I think they want to hear so they won't reject me. Hypo independence, as in, or people pleasing, codependency.
So coming back to the balance with the mother in the life, if someone's still got a narcissistic mother in their life and they're trying to find balance, are they even going to know what their values are? Are they even going to know who they are outside of that?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
What's the responsibility of the person who is hypo or hyper independence in this? If they're avoiding intimacy, if they're avoiding intimacy because they need to reveal their true self, how much of a responsibility is it on them to actually know what that true self is to then get intimate?
Well, first it would be, for me, even acknowledging that that's happening, that you're using either of those coping mechanisms. And let me be very clear, these are coping mechanisms. And there's no shame in the fact that you've got them. Shame belongs with the person that created an environment where you had to develop them to survive because they are survival mechanisms. The problem then becomes that becomes someone's identity itself. And we can be very scared to take them off because we don't know what's underneath. And it can be very vulnerable and very raw and terrifying because it also means we're opening ourselves up to the thing we've been learning to avoid all the time, which is the rejection, the abandonment, the intimacy. And so, yeah, there is 100% a responsibility because it might not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to make sure it doesn't impact other people. And if you are walking into relationships in a state of people pleasing or hyper independence, that means that other person is either not getting full consent over who they're in relationship with, or are going to be much more able to manipulate and abuse you, right? Because they know, and that's what happens. We see that all the time, that people in these roles or in these coping mechanisms get into abusive relationships because it's also your pattern. You've learned that this is the model of love. Your subjective interpretation of love is compliance, silence, distance, abandonment, all of those things. So you replicate that as you go through. So if you're not actively unlearning that, there is a place where it becomes toxic itself, and I do talk about that with people pleasing particularly. But hyper independence is exactly the same. It's quite controlling because it means that there's a position of superiority in that.
You have to control the outcome and then
Mm.
create safety within the relationship without being authentic.
Yeah, well, and you sit in a place of judgment when you're hyper independent, of I know better, and you get to be my friend, you get to come into my inner circle, you get to be part of the world, and therefore you should be grateful. And then so you very right, but you very often will people pleasers and hyper independence together. And you
Hmm.
see them, the hyper independent pulls away and the people pleaser chases, and so on. And then if they come back, actually, sometimes the people pleaser can back off because they feel they're overwhelmed by it, when that intimacy is embraced or welcomed. And, it's a really,
Because of the rejection they've received for their true self.
yeah. And, people, again, it's this thing of people pleasing being um, a shield, a hiding away from the world and an avoidance of rejection. And when someone says, actually, I really want to see beyond that, you can tell me the truth, that in itself can be threatening, you
So
know?
how is this person gonna feel safe to remove that shield when they're still in a place where they might need it?
Exactly. They're not. They can't. Because if you are still needing to use coping mechanisms, then your brain is not going to unlearn using them, right? And it's a different thing to having filters for different environments. So if I'm at work in an office or something, God forbid, because I'd never want to go back to that environment. But if I was, I would have to put on some filters where I would have to be compliant and silent to kind of make my life easier, but also grease the wheels a bit and kind of be able to progress maybe in my career. And it's political maybe, right? But it's
So
not
you're masking up for money and they're masking up because family?
masking up for money. That feels quite black and white because it's masking up for career,
Jumping
fulfillment.
into
It's,
the eyes of listeners who may still
yeah,
be black and white, and
absolutely.
myself was
Yeah,
before as
no.
well.
Um, but this is where we have to see the shades of grey, right? Because that's another thing we do, especially with there's CPTSD involved, and when there's neurodivergence, um, and when there is just generally trauma. People will go black and white because it makes things make sense, and it's a lot easier to hold on to, or what's the word, exist in. It's really important that we bring in the shades of grey in terms of the nuance and the different environments where it's appropriate. And I do think there's a difference between masking and filtering, in that we're not pretending to be someone completely different. Like if someone says something or does something that completely compromises my really core beliefs or values, I'm going to speak up. So, for example, if I was in an office and someone started making racist slurs or, homophobic comments or jokes, I'm going to speak up against that. That's not going to be permissible in my view, right? I'm not letting that slide. People pleasing days, I would have not said a word for the fear of the rejection and the shame and the like, oh God, who do you think you are type comments. But that's not me anymore. But if I can't really think of an example of where I would not speak up. I think it's the thing of how important how important is this as a value to me,
Mm.
knowing myself well enough to know where my beliefs are being compromised. So it's filters in terms of maybe, I don't know, like if I don't like my boss, right? You don't have to like your boss to work with them. It helps for sure, but you don't have to. You need to be able to do your job, just as you don't have to like your employees. They need to be able to do their job. And of course it helps, but we shouldn't be measuring social fluency in order to employ someone or work with someone, right? What we need to know is that they are capable and able. We don't have to have a friendship connection with them to work with them. But we can still be civil and kind and polite, and we can still make nice, right?
Mm.
But if they're in my personal life, I'm not going to spend time with that person, right? I'm not going to pretend I like them and, laugh at their joke or whatever that I wouldn't necessarily laugh at, that I might
So
laugh
if
at.
someone is too far away from your set of values, you can peacefully coexist
Yes.
without that compromising who you are and what you stand
Yes.
for, and in turn causing you harm. And so what's the difference between the narcissistic like family systems here?
Well, in this situation, so the people pleaser in that situation where they don't like their boss, but they're not willing to own that for themselves, not necessarily even to their boss. It's the thing of, if you go into work and you're pretending to this like level of, yeah, you're so funny, you're great, you're this, and actually maybe you are allowing them into your personal life and building a friendship relationship with them because you don't feel able to hold the boundary of, no thanks, I don't want to come to dinner, or no thanks, I'm not going for drinks, or I'm not coming to that party, or whatever it might be that where someone starts trying to infiltrate into your personal life. Your work boundary is not as strong as it should be. So we're ultimately sort of being able to hold boundaries in our sense of self in the environment and not allowing it to be eroded. And yeah, it's kind of, I think that's more about the thing, is the erosion of self in the environment, that we're looking at what it will cost me not to say something.
I was thinking about the relation between the person who's written this letter and what would that be like to be constantly in emotional flashbacks around someone?
Right.
And
That's
how
so
able
great.
would you be
Yeah.
to feel strong in yourself, in your values, but
Yeah.
also dealing with CPTSD, with these big emotional dysregulating things going on in your body, not being able to speak, feeling spiky skin, the ways that emotions come up in your body.
Right. Such a good question, because I come back to, if you know who you are, you're not going to be experiencing that CPTSD. My fundamental tenet is, ultimately, this is quite a bold
This
claim.
is black and white. Let's go.
This is, well, it's not that black and white because it's not, well, I'll explain what my tenet is. Virtually everything that we deal with in therapy can be resolved via identity building in my client group. So I'm not going to apply that to every other client group because I don't work with like grief well, I do work with grief, but bereavement, for example. And I don't work,
Schizophrenia.
yeah, like I don't. So in my client group, in people who are trying to heal from emotional abuse, I believe that the number one focus of this work is about identity building, knowing who you are. Because the more you know who you are, the more things like rejection aren't going to bother you, right? So if, for example, someone criticizes my work, right? They come into one of my social videos and be like, and this happens regularly, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Who do you think you are? This, that, and the other. In the old days, pre-therapy, pre all the work that I've done, that would have crucified me. Like, it would have made me question everything about myself. I'd have felt the rejection, the sting. It would have sat with me for days and days and days. And I'd have, in fact, longer probably. It would have sat with me for ages. Now, it's just like, okay, scroll past. It doesn't bother me. And the reason it doesn't bother me anymore, and rejection doesn't bother me, it doesn't mean I don't have a little, but it's like, okay, but that's not about me, right? I know what I'm talking about. I know I've done the research. I know that my knowledge is founded in deep research, and I know and experience, both personal, clinical, all, different types of experience. And I also know I'm open to correction. So if someone comes in on a social video and go, "Hey, you've got that citation wrong," this has also happened. It's not that study, it's this study. My God, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for clarifying or telling me. Right? It doesn't bother me. I don't go into a defensive space. I don't get upset by it. I don't see it as a personal attack or a devaluing of myself. Right? Because I know who I am, because I know I'm allowed to make mistakes. I'm a human being, and that mistakes don't define me, and that I can learn and grow from them. And they're a really good thing for me. Right? Mistakes are great. You know, obviously there are some that are a bit shit, but ultimately, if we're learning, it's not actually a mistake, really, right?
Hmm.
My kind of answer is that if you know who you are, the things that you have flashbacks about aren't going to be as big anymore because you won't have a rejection wound anymore. You won't have an abandonment wound. You'll be able to say
That what
their rejection of
CPTSD
me,
is?
well, it's emotional flashbacks usually triggered to things like rejection. It's always at the root of everything is shame, toxic shame. So
Okay.
toxic shame is at the bottom of everything. And avoiding all these things is to avoid feeling toxic shame. So if rejection is the thing we're trying to avoid, then we're trying to avoid the toxic shame that accompanies rejection, criticism, not good enough, right? Abandonment. Make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to picture what kind of things people would be remembering when they're having emotional flashbacks,
Well,
and
I
then
mean,
trying to find the so this person said, "How do I balance my narcissistic mother in my life?" And where is there any way that you can squeeze in a relationship without that impacting someone? What's the balance between harm and relationship? Is there one? Trying
that's
to heal from
tricky.
CPT.
I would, it might be distancing quite a lot. So your exposure is down to like 2% whilst you're doing the bulk of the work. You can do some healing. It would depend how involved you are with that person, which I probably should have said right at the beginning. But the ultimately, it's going to be a bit swimming upstream. So how much you're always going to be swimming upstream. How strong do you want the current to be? Now, we can swim against a 1 or 2% current and actually maybe feel quite good for it because we're seeing the development in time. Our muscles are growing and we're getting better at swimming up that stream. But if we're at 100%, if we're living with them and they're there all the time and these wounds are being activated constantly, we're going to drown potentially.
Mm.
So it's going to come down to that. Like, how often are you being activated? How often are you being triggered? How often are you being exposed to the wounds that caused the CPTSD in the first place?
So
Right?
you're saying to really be reflective about the relationship and the impact on you,
Yeah.
and sounds like brutal honesty with oneself
Yeah.
in order to truly see where the balance is.
Right.
So it's not how do I, it's not how do I balance it, is what are we actually balancing here? What is the cost?
Why do I want to balance it, actually? Right? What am I sitting in that is leaving me needing to balance it? That am I still having fear, obligation, and guilt control my decisions, my beliefs, my actions? Are they weaponizing those things? Is my empathy being weaponized? Why am I keeping someone in my life who has caused me harm? And I know they've caused me harm because I've got this condition as a result of the harm they've caused. Why do I want to balance it? Which there's the brutal honesty, I would say.
So just trying to step into their shoes a little bit. What are they holding on to?
Hope. usually, toxic hope, that it will get better. If I can manage myself, then they will get better, is usually what people are hoping for. If I can control my triggers, if I can control my reaction, if I can hold my boundaries, they will be kinder to me. But we are still managing them through our behavior. And that's not what we're trying to do when we're healing.
And if you have CPTSD, it doesn't even sound like it might be possible to be able to do that, to control someone's behavior, because our behavior is emotional reactions sometimes when we lose that impulse control and we do have
Mhm.
flashbacks. So I'm going to throw in a curveball and say, okay, maybe I'll just put up with CPTSD if I can have a relationship with my mum.
And that's your choice to make. But know that it's a choice you're making. It's fine, but own it. Like, I have no agenda. I get accused quite regularly of having one. I don't. You have to make choices for yourself. The only thing I ask is that you own the choice. You take responsibility for it. This is your choice. It's a valid one. I get it. Like toxic hope, that the desire, the need, the want for a parent is totally natural. It's completely natural. And it's utterly grief laden to think about not having them in your life. It's painful to go through that. The choice you are making is to not grieve that relationship and what has happened in it by costing yourself those triggers and that not healing. That's okay, but it is your choice, and that's where you are responsible for it, that you are making that decision. I mean, I get it.
Is that like a fear of the unknown as well? Like, I know how much the emotional flashback hurts. I know how much
100%.
it hurts to be in a relationship with someone who probably doesn't treat me that well or hasn't in the past, but I don't know how much grief it's going to hurt. And I'm going to lose someone that's really, like, that I think might be supportive of me one day, maybe. And I don't know what that's going to feel like.
Right. And fear of the unknown, fear of the grief, the pain, the retribution of going no contact, the loss of all the other relationships you might lose as a result, too. That if I put these boundaries in, how many people am I going to lose? There's a very real threat, and it is real, that if you say no, I'm not tolerating it anymore, there are going to be people that side with the abusive parent. And that is painful because it keeps showing you how many people were pretending to love you based on your silence and your compliance. And yeah, so there is a denial of that. I mean, for me, toxic hope is denial and then denial is avoidance of grief, right? So we sit in the toxic hope because we don't want to feel the grief. And valid. It's horrible. It's shit. There are times we don't want to go through it. And that's okay too. But my experience is that with the awareness of the behavior, there comes a point at which we no longer can tolerate it because we start seeing just how much it's damaging us, just how much it hurts us, just how much we have to sacrifice ourselves to be in and stay in that relationship. And in those moments is where we walk away. And very often it's something tiny, like something really minor that everyone else is like, oh my God, you're overreacting. And it's like, no, you don't understand. This is literally the straw that broke the camel's back. Because it's so representative of every other thing. Just a, don't speak to me like that. I don't like it. Who do you think you are? Oh my God. Da, 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 da.
Well, if I haven't seen that a few
Oh,
times.
I mean, right? Right? And that can be enough for someone to go, no, I'm out. I'm done.
Hmm. But it's the
Not
difference
the,
between knowing what you stand for, where your values are, and eventually finding that voice.
yeah.
And then the devastation that when you do find your voice, they don't listen anyway.
Yeah. And I think that's just it. There comes a point where you realize you are not to blame for all of it. But that belief that it's all your fault has kept you in that relationship. Because if I can just be good enough, if I could just heal my CPTSD and my reaction enough, I can manage this person's behavior and how it impacts me. But maybe, you can't. And when you start realizing their responsibility in that relationship, particularly a parent, you maybe are kind of like, this is gross and I want more and better from my relationships. If you're scared of rejection, of saying no, have no idea how to trust people, you're not alone, and you don't have to heal alone either. That's what the Hub is for. It's a membership community designed for survivors just like you. Every month, we dive into powerful courses, we hold live calls, and connect in a supportive, understanding space so you can break free from the past and build healthy, fulfilling relationships. Maybe it's time to stop surviving and instead start thriving. Visit jointhehub.ac today using the code POD20 to get £20 off your first month's membership. I can't wait to see you there. Take care. Bye. And actually, that's the point at which you do find those relationships that give more and show you respect. Yeah. So, how do you balance the narcissistic mother in your life while trying to heal from PTSD? It's for you to decide ultimately, but you do it with a conscious choice and knowing what that balance looks like for you to be able to heal. So is it 0%? Is it 2%? Is it 10%, 50, 100? That is not for me to decide or choose for anybody, but I will.
If you could
Go
ask
on.
them 2 or 3 questions to help them reflect on
Mm.
that balance, what would they be?
Well, my favorite ones. What will it cost you? What will you gain? Will it change the outcome? You
And
know,
what, as I struggled to understand that at the start, what would a cost be?
erosion of identity, self voice, erosion of self respect, respect of others. We know that long term exposure to things like, well, to gaslighting specifically, causes depression and ultimately suicide. So, what is the cost means what impact does this have on you? What price are you paying in terms of your well-being, your mental health, other relationships? Very often you'll see marriages break down because one person is prioritizing the narcissistic, one partner is prioritizing the narcissistic parent in order to keep them sweet, maintain that relationship at the cost of their romantic partnership. And is that a price you're willing to pay? It's not for me to decide. If you are, that's okay, no judgment. Know that that's what's happening, right? So it's well-being, relationships, mental health, obviously. It might even be physical well-being. Long-term exposure, again, to this kind of stress and trauma and cortisol and adrenaline has quite a devastating effect on our autoimmune system. There are lots of studies starting to come out showing that. The immune system thing is 100%. We know or believe fibromyalgia is related to that overexposure to adrenaline and cortisol. And to be very clear, this is not me saying it's in your head. This is a very physical, real thing, but it's as a result of exposure to abuse, long-term abuse or stress.
I think there used to be a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding or a lack of
Hmm.
understanding of fibromyalgia.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely something to research if you're not sure what it is.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, it's one of those conditions, a little bit like lupus, for example, maybe not lupus, but that's a process of elimination rather than this is this thing initially, because
Mm.
it's almost an umbrella term for lots of different symptoms that are unexplained by other things. So yeah, and that's why people are like, "Oh, it's in your head," type thing. Well, no, then it's not. I mean, I have friends who've got it. I see it in my clients regularly. It is a really debilitating condition, but it is, made worse by stress exposure. So, yeah, um, Ba-da-ba. What was the original question that you asked me and then we ended up there? I
I was
forgot.
going to
Did you?
ask next, give me a couple of examples of what a gain would be.
What gain? What will I gain? Will I gain peace in the relationship that I'm looking for? Will I gain material thing that I need? Will I gain what is it that I'm going to get from costing myself? So if I go to the shop and I pay £10 for a piece of chewing gum, that's too high price,
I
right?
was just
But
about
if
to
I
ask about the transactional nature of
right,
this.
yeah, okay. So it is transactional because this is what you're doing. You're balancing. The question is about balance. Well, cost and gain is the balance. So, and then outcome being the result. So if the cost is £10 for a piece of chewing gum, that's too high a price, right? For too low a reward. But if it's £10 for a all singing, all dancing, amazing TV or computer or something, that's a good deal, right? So maybe I'm willing to pay £10. No, that depends if I've got £10 to spend. Because there's that other side. Have you got the money, the price to pay, the resources, the spoons, if we're going to use spoon theory, for example?
I just want to notice how quite sad that is actually
Mm,
to even have to do that.
yeah,
I see in so many healthy relationships and in the relationships in my life as well. I don't need to sit there and think about how transactional it is. I don't need to sit down
no.
and think about every little inch of energy and what that costs me and where I gain. I have done. I absolutely have done,
Mm-hmm,
but I don't need to be so analytical anymore. And I think I probably was more analytical because I was stuck in that for a while,
mm-hmm.
but I feel more at peace not having to weigh everything up anymore.
Right, because in reality, healthy relationships are just naturally reciprocal. And yes, they might be weighted in someone's favor more at times and then in others, but also what's being given might be different to what the other person is contributing, right? So if for example you've got a friend who's really good at tech and then you've got a friend who's really good at music, one person in those two people in relationship, one might be offering help with tech support and the other might be going, oh, have you heard this music, have you heard this latest track, and sharing. We're both being enriched in that situation, both people are enriched, but it's different offerings. So it's not being really justice based, oh God, I could go down a whole rabbit hole of justice regulation and resource regulation, but maybe that's a whole different video. But if we are having to sit and look at the justice in the relationship, there may not be something healthy going on. If we feel like it's weighted in someone else's favor all the time, that does need to be examined and looked at and queried. But
How do you know
also,
it's not just a trauma response?
and I was just going to say,
Okay.
you have to be conscious of your own lens. So it comes back to knowing your own self, your own subjectivity, and the idea that um, everything that we know or believe, and this is going to spin everyone out into a big existential crisis. So sorry, not sorry, because it's also the most liberating thing I think I can ever offer anyone. Everything you believe is subjective. So the way you interpret the word love is different to the way I interpret the word love, right? Because of our subjective experience, because of the beliefs of the people who taught us what that is. Now, we might have overlaps for sure. And very often people do that are in relationship to one another, whatever that relationship is. But ultimately, our subjectivity is learned from the people who formed us, right? Who taught us. And if their subjectivity was based on getting their needs met, those needs might, oh, sorry, that subjectivity might look really, really toxic in terms of our expectation. So I've shared this on socials. My friend said to me a little while ago, Helen, people are in relationship with you because of you, not in spite of you. And it blew my mind. Now, you might think that I would know that as a concept, and I do on a surface level. But in the context of the conversation we were having around relationships and stuff, and talking about me as relationship Helen being like boring and like having to conform and this, that, and the other, and him being like, no, they like the person they saw at the beginning. They want they want to be with that person, not relationship, Helen, as you're defining it. And what it made me realize when he said that was, I've been told that to be able to be loved, I have to be this sensible, non-Helen version of myself. And people have repeated that to me over time, or like as in confirmation, because I've picked people that would have that expectation too, right? So to hear that people want to be with you because of you, not in spite of you, really shifted my interpretation of love to not being punitive, but to being celebratory, right? Yeah. Any
So I'm
thoughts?
thinking now, I wonder what love means to this person. And I'm then thinking about
Hmm.
they have CPTSD. That's going to show. If their mother is even a little bit attuned to them, then that lack of empathy must show as well. That if this person's constantly being emotionally triggered and their mother might not care or see them at all, it's just a bit devastating, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So to bring it back to why do they love this person if they're
Mm.
not even themselves?
Mm.
How is that? How is the daughter or child serving the narcissistic parent in this relationship if they're not allowed to be themselves?
Right. So let's go back to the word attunement first. What does attunement take?
Subjective.
Right. But, well, tell me your subjective interpretation.
Okay. To be attuned to someone is to notice your impact on them. So if I did or said something to you and your reaction was anything but positive and connection, to notice
Hmm.
that and to
Hmm.
be attuned to your response and say, are you okay? Did that land weird? What's going on for you? I care about
Right.
you. How do you feel right now? I said
Okay.
something that hurt you. Oh, okay. Can we talk about that? I want to see what that is. That to me is
Okay.
attunement.
Okay. And so what do you need to be able to do that?
See,
Hmm.
accountability, compassion, to be able to see someone as them and their reaction without blaming yourself. So sometimes if I've done something wrong, say I've dropped something on my partner's head and
Mm.
I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't allow her space to have her reaction and her anger towards me. Sometimes
Right.
I'll call myself out and say, hang on, I can't separate my guilt. Give me a minute to feel it and then I can be with you.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. But you're still recognizing you did something wrong and that
Mm,
you want to be accountable for it.
mm.
Right. So you're right. My subjective interpretation would say that you need empathy and accountability to attune to someone to be able to repair if there is a negative impact, right?
Mhm.
But this person is trying to love somebody who can't do that. So it's a one-way street because the crux actually isn't empathy even, it's the accountability. So if our writer has a trigger because of the parent's behavior, that means the parent has to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that thing. Or I understand that hurts you. I know you've got a trigger in that and I shouldn't have done it. Or can I help you through it even? Because it's yours to manage. Triggers are ours to manage and other people aren't, you know, we don't get to say you can't hold me accountable or reject me or criticize me constructively because I've got those wounds. We still have to be accountable and manage our own triggers. But if you're attuned to someone and you know that things are difficult and you care about the impact and you want to help them grow, you can support them through it to a degree, not to the point where it again is costing you anything, but you can say, remember, I love you. Remember, I care about you. I'm telling you this because I want the relationship to work, not because I want to shame you or humiliate you. Right?
It's back to a bit of reciprocity.
Right. Reciprocity and accountability and care and impact. And, we don't live in a world where we can completely individuate ourselves and our behavior from other people, but we can to a degree. You know, if somebody is hurt, we've had it on the Facebook page recently. They were upset that I made a comment or posted about autism and Tylenol and that bullshit. And actually, fuck it, I'm calling it bullshit because it reminded them of being silenced as a child, and it meant that they couldn't have reasonable discussion with me. And that wasn't what was being said at all. And so there was first of all a projection, and that I had triggered them because I had made the statement. And I responded saying, that's yours to manage. I'm allowed to have a different opinion. And actually, you're projecting a reaction onto me. If you disagree with me, I'm going to respond to disagree back because I've done the research, I've got the knowledge, I've looked heavily, and you know this because we've talked about it off camera. You've probably done more than me, but I have the science. I know what the science says, and it does not reinforce that narrative. And
Right now.
well, no. And if it
And that's
changes,
okay.
then
Yeah.
right? Anything is possible. It could turn out MPD is nothing to do with environment and everything to do with genetics. Doubt it, but it could. And then in which case I'll stop referring to Kohut and Kernberg and we'll just ignore all of that because it's not relevant anymore. But I mean, look, the whole thing being that person's trigger was theirs to manage. That wasn't what was happening in that moment. They were feeling it because of their own experience, but it's not for me to manage that. I can recognize it. I can say I get it, but it's also not what's happening here from
And
me.
it sounds like also a balance of, I think one of my friends showed me this sort of circle where you place stones about who's in your life and who's not.
Mhm.
Someone that is on Facebook may not be within that sort of reciprocal relational space.
Right.
So you may not want to extend that much empathy, care, compassion towards someone who you may not have this interpersonal relationship. But a mother?
But if my child came and said to me, you triggered me because you did this thing and you said that and it was really awful. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know there was a trigger for you around that. Can you help me understand a bit more of what you experience and what you need from me to be able to help you manage through it next time? Because again, I'm still not going to never say you're wrong or you've hurt me or you've done this because there's a trigger there, but I can manage how I do it so that the sting of it is less, so it doesn't necessarily lead to a trigger, so that I can hold them through it and help them rewire their brain so it's no longer a trigger,
That
right?
this person could look at whether they're having that kind of motherly interaction or whether they're being treated like someone on Facebook.
Yeah. Ultimately, yeah, well, yeah. And this is the thing, is that we often stay in these relationships because we want them to show us that we actually mean as much as we want them or want to them.
And of course they do. It's their mum.
Like, of course. And this is the whole thing about nobody voluntarily orphans themselves without a huge amount of grief and pain. And if somebody is coming and saying to you, I have no longer got a relationship with my parent because of the way they have treated me, that is not a fad. That's not a trend. It's not a phase. That is a heart-wrenching, soul-destroying, identity-stripping action, choice, decision, experience. And it is the most grief-laden thing because not only, as I said earlier, does it expose that relationship and lose that relationship and that hope dies with that relationship, and you become to the knowledge that they don't want to fight. Their ego is more important than you. Like they cannot just concede that the things they maybe said or did hurt you. Even if it was normal at the time, they can't say, yeah, do you know what? It was normal at the time, but I wish I'd never done it. Can see now how awful that was as a parent, right? Cry it out method was very popular when my oldest was born. I never did it, thank God. but it was the thing that everyone was doing as a parent, and almost to the point of judgment if you didn't do it. And we now know how devastating that is to a child's body, because they stop crying, but their cortisol, their adrenaline is still sky bloody high, but they stop crying because they know there's no point, which means they've not got any defense mechanism, which means they are constantly at threat, because the crying is the defense mechanism. And I could go down a whole thing.
Just about to ask you if
Go
we
on.
want to go down, because I could also go down this rabbit hole about, about that generation, those times, society, etc. So I want to ask, rabbit hole or another question?
No, let's rabbit hole it, because we're nearly at the end anyway. So we'll rabbit
Okay.
hole for a bit, shall we?
Yeah.
Go on, ask. What were you going to say?
Okay. So put yourself in the shoes of someone who, what their parents' generation was just out of the war.
Right.
The shame and the blame was the way to control children, to get them to do what they wanted, needed. They needed to go to school. They needed to get up in the morning.
Right.
They needed to go to work to put food on the table. They didn't have such a life of luxury. They didn't have the time to sit down and explain why things had to be the way they were. They were just told, this is what it is, deal with it, buckle up, go to school. This is the only way you'll survive. It was survival for all of them, for the children, for the adults.
Right.
So why should they be accountable for something that they had to do?
I'm confused as to why that's different from today's parents.
Because we have more time.
Do we?
Some of us do.
In the 50s, 40s and 50s, post-war era, 45, typical family was that the mother was at home with the children, that the father went out to work.
Stand corrected immediately.
Okay, right. Okay. So now I would say there's more constraints on a parent's time than there were back then, actually, because the economy and the division of labor was very different. Social conditioning was a lot around what other people thought of you. And so fear and shame and control. And so you can say, so let's go back to the cry it out method then. If I, as a parent, had done that, and now my child maybe struggles with anxiety, and I'm not saying this is why everyone's child is struggling with anxiety, just as a caveat. No, I'm just saying, say, for example, there is now a thing. I could, as a parent, say, do you know, I'm so sorry, because I did cry it out method, and I know now that that might have impacted how safe you feel in the world. And I wish I hadn't done it. It was very normal at the time for parents to do, but it wasn't good for you. And if I had known that, I never would have done it. Doesn't make it okay that I did it, but I didn't have the so we're talking about intention and impact, right? The intent and the impact. So we always say impact outweighs intent, right? There is a place where intent is actually contextual and important. It doesn't lessen the impact, but when somebody is not doing something deliberately, it is easier to forgive, and they do it without knowledge. It's easier to forgive that thing. But when we're talking about a parent who is unable to say, yeah, I shouldn't have told you to worry about what everyone else would think of you, for example, just as a 80s type thing. If a parent isn't willing to say, I shouldn't have done that, and shouldn't have made you fear other people's judgment of you, because their ego won't allow them to admit that maybe they didn't get it perfectly right as a parent, and that actually they might contribute to why a child, and who is now an adult, struggles with either mental health or CPTSD, for example, then there's no accountability at all, right? So we're not asking for, I should have known not to do the thing. We're asking for, I recognize the thing I did had a negative impact, and I'm sorry for it, right? And we can say, I had no idea what I was doing, that was going to do that. And had I known, I never would have done it. But I understand that does not lessen its impact. So we're never minimizing the impact, but we are saying that with different knowledge, I would have done differently. So I know my children are going to come to me at some point. I have no doubt they're going to say I worked too much. And I'm going to say, you're right, I did. And I didn't like it, and I had to, because I was the only one running the ship. But I'm not saying for a second that means that you have to be okay with it. I can absolutely own that because of those circumstances, I was not as available, or I worked so much that you didn't see as much of me as I would have wanted you to. And that hurts me too, but it hurts you more. And I am sorry that that had that impact on you, right? The context of me being a single parent and the only income does color the fact that this is not as big a choice necessarily as it might first feel, that I don't choose to not be around them. Whereas some narcissistic parents may well do that. I'd rather be at work than with my child, and won't own it, right? Because I do love my job. I love what I do, but I also love my children. But I also like feeding them and clothing them and myself. No, it's not just for them, and myself. So I have to work.
So what stops people being, because myself, I have been held accountable by my kid, and I
Right.
still will, and I remain in a place of accountability for as long as she needs me to be.
What happened there?
Sad,
Okay.
because I have made some mistakes and it has
Okay.
had an impact,
Right.
and I wish I could go back and not do it.
Mm.
Yes, the situation was out of my control, but I see the impact, and I can stay in accountability with her, and she can stay mad at me for as long as she needs to be, because I would rather her be mad at me than herself. So what stops people from being able to sit in that anger from their child?
Their ego. Like they too have the fear of not being perfect.
And what would it feel like for that to be chipped away at, even slightly?
Annihilation. And total annihilation. Have you heard of narcissistic collapse? Right. That's what we would be looking at. And where, for example, someone who's got CPTSD hears you've made a mistake and they have the flashback and they, come, but they could get to the place of, yeah, okay. Now, sometimes people can be very defensive. And no, that's not what happened. I meant it like this. And I didn't say it. And they try and twist it and change it a little bit so that they don't actually have to be quite as accountable, because to admit the accountability means not being perfect. And to not be perfect means abandonment and rejection, humiliation and shame, because love was conditional on perfection as a child, right? So, I know, right? But when you are healing and you are working on these wounds, it becomes more and more acceptable in self to be flawed as a human, right? And you can stop defending against mistakes. Now, there is another side of this, is that some people don't get to give you those criticisms, right? That they're not allowed to make those comments. And also that criticism should always be constructive. Just, I don't like your dress. That's not criticism. That's shaming. That's humiliation. That's judgment. It's superiority. It's also the
Entitlement.
huge entitlement. It's all of the grandiosity. It's all of it, right? But babe, I'm not sure that dress is the right cut for you. Have you ever tried a skater dress or an A-line? I think it'd look really good on you. In a situation where you can do something about it, just FYI. So not like we're out for drinks and I go, you should try an A-line. That's not going to happen, because first of all, I'd never do it uninvited anyway. But if we're getting ready and, or we're shopping and you try on a dress and I go, I'm not sure that's the one. Have you ever tried this shape instead? I think it would suit your body type better. That's appropriate, right?
If invited.
If
Yeah.
if asked for. Um, but the narcissistic parent,
Devaluing.
sorry. Well, they'll first of all do the devaluing, but they won't. Their perfectionism is evidence of them being a human, and they're not even able to kind of sit in that place where a CPTSD person might be able to sit of, okay, that really hurt, and I'm going to like brace, go through it. Okay, I'm still here and I'm allowed to make a mistake, and somebody doesn't think I'm a terrible human for it. Whereas when I mean, narcissism is a defense system. I often say, this is going to be difficult.
I'll likely
God,
agree.
don't you don't want to throw yourself under the bus quite yet. Just wait until I've said it, because you might just hold that pony for a mo. Oh, this is tricky. If we were to look at people pleasing on a spectrum, the very far end, the very top end of that spectrum is covert narcissism. If we look at hyperindependence on a spectrum, the very top end of that spectrum is overt narcissism.
Okay, I can't speak to hyperindependence, but people pleasing, I see it in coverts.
Right.
Plain as day.
Right. So you can see that in people pleasing, in its like healable
So
space, is protection and self-management around others to avoid rejection. But it also can be victimhood and sitting in victimhood, maybe even using the victimhood space a bit.
so it's a
I do
spectrum.
everything for everyone. And yeah.
Yeah, because what I'm
Anything.
hearing is flight response, nervous system, and then it drifts into more personality and safety, fawn, and then people pleasing. And then as we get
Fawn and people pleasing are the same. But yeah.
yeah, okay, my brain is still like, fawn is nicer and people pleasing is a little bit more manipulative.
Fawn
Okay.
sounds like a baby deer.
Yeah, it does. It brings up that
Yeah.
imagery of
Yeah.
childlike,
Sweet.
helplessness,
and poor me.
and powerlessness.
Yeah. Right. But
And then
this
people
is going to be brutal, but it's manipulation.
So where a person has autonomy or an opportunity of autonomy over themselves and they stay in people pleasing and then they become aware of it, it's a choice to stay in powerlessness.
Yeah.
And then that choice becomes weaponized victim space.
Yeah.
Is what you're
And
saying?
because ultimately, if freeze is the first, then it's fight or flight, and then it's fawn, right?
Ooh, I want to correct that actually. The weaponized victim space relating to covert narcissism take away the awareness because it's likely they won't be
Yes.
aware. Okay.
Disagree.
In a self-reflective space.
They know that if I say X and do Y, I'm going to get Z.
But they may
Right?
not be objectively aware of the impact of that.
Don't care is the actual probably thing. It's not that they're not aware of the impact. They know exactly why they're doing what they're doing. They just don't care because their need is more important than the
They
recipient's.
care more about themselves.
Yeah. So we come back to ego again of I cannot be anything other than the center to everything, whether it's overt or covert. Also that we don't normally do the binary thing anymore, but like it's easier to kind of, so it would be a paint palette of things rather than specific.
Yeah, linear scale.
Yeah. Yes, or binary. Yeah, so we are using overt presenting is what I would say. The more overt presenting, more covert presenting. You are going to be dominant. Someone is going to be dominant one way or the other in terms of their expression. But you must also remember that people also could have HPD going on too, or they also could have, it's rare, but they could have borderline as well. Very rare though. That's like a multidisciplinary place like to get to diagnosis of that. They also could be autistic or ADHD. I get asked that all the time about the autism and narcissism thing, and it's that you're one or the other. And it's not that. You could be both. Of course you could. But in that situation, MPD is going to be the driver. The autism is a passenger, probably. They might change, but MPD is also a survival strategy, which is why we can say, or I can say, hypothetically, that people pleasing, being a coping mechanism, is the bottom end of the spectrum of covert narcissism. So it's all survival mechanisms.
It's exploded.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's awesome. You've opened up a whole new door of thought around that.
Okay, so here's where I filter. There are thoughts and insights that I have that I don't share for fear of their impact on the audience, the alienation that I might cause from myself, in that people might hear that and think, you're really judgmental, you're making all these comments and aspersions
Absolutely.
and
When I first heard you say people pleasing is manipulative
mm,
and, about controlling the outcome, I felt defensive. I was like, what? No. Like, I didn't want to look at myself, because then to look at myself would be to take accountability. And of course, I wanted to protect myself from the shame. But once I was able to see that, I could see that any people pleasing tendencies that I did have was to manipulate to keep me safe. And when I was aware of that, I could work on stopping doing that, because I don't want to manipulate people. I want to
right,
be myself.
right. And so here's the thing. We might change the word manipulation to influence in
Hmm.
before awareness comes in. Once comes in, then there's an intentional choice to do it. And that is
Yes. Yeah.
manipulation,
There we go.
right? That for me is what it feels like. That once
Yeah,
you
yeah, there's a
know,
nuance.
yeah, and that it is controlling. And I had somebody actually contact me, a friend who'd heard there's a thing on my Substack about me talking with Paul Russell about fawn response. And in fact, there's a clip on my socials of I'm on board. I think people pleasing is controlling. And they contacted me and going, I heard that and oh my God. And I was like, how dare you? And then I was like, oh fuck, she's right. And it was like, yeah, because here's the thing. When you say to me, I feel defensive. Okay, so what's the reflection? Because the minute you feel defensive, there's something being protected. You do not need to defend if there's nothing to protect, right? Now, sometimes it's appropriate to be defensive. Sometimes it's appropriate that people do not get information from you. Like, I don't know, I'll use my own experience. My mother wanting to know how much money I earn a year, right? I'm not telling you that. Why are you being so defensive? You're so cagey.
It's a
No,
bad
that's
thing.
just my private information that I don't want to share. You're so secretive. No, you're just not entitled to that information. Now, this is a made up conversation. This hasn't happened. I haven't spoken to her in nearly 4 years. So, you know, the, the thing of like, there's a line between being defensive to protect from accountability and defensive to protect our privacy. And I would argue it's not even defensive when we're protecting privacy.
So I'm guessing a lot of people who have survived these childhoods won't really know the difference.
No, and they'll also have been taught that privacy is secrecy and that to have it is a terrible thing, which then turns into oversharing, because if I leave out any detail, later you find that out, you're going to say you kept secrets, you were hiding things from me, you did that on purpose. No, that's not what it is. You're allowed to have things that you keep to yourself. You don't need to share every piece of information with everyone. If somebody finds something out later that they are upset about, either you take accountability if it's appropriate and say, yeah, I didn't share that information, didn't want to, whatever reason. But it's not always that you have to have shared it. And that is the difference. So, yeah. Well, we started this episode saying we had loads of questions and we've answered one, and it's actually been brilliant. And I don't know about you, but I've enjoyed it a lot.
Yes.
I hope the listeners do. But I think if people do have questions they would want me to answer, please send them in.
We'll get through
You
it one
can
at a
do,
time.
yeah,
No, I'm kidding.
one at a time. Yeah. I mean, hey, it's an episode, so that's cool for me. But this is the thing. That one question is never going to be, oh, well, just have her in your life 5% of the time. Because it's nuanced, it's different for every single person. Like, if you're more healed, where are you in the journey? Where are you in terms of managing your own triggers? It's personal. But looking at why you need to balance it, looking at why you feel obliged to balance it, looking at what you're holding on to balance it, and what it will cost you not to balance it, is going to be really, really important. Because if you are labeling your mother as narcissistic, you know that she's harmful. And before I get in the comments, "Oh, everyone with NPD is abusive." Yes, they are. It's literally in the research. It's literally in the descriptions that this is the only personality disorder that causes deliberate harm to those around them. Their significant others, in fact. I can never remember the citation because actually that is the one that I got wrong on my socials. And then somebody pointed it out and I was like, shit, okay, sorry. But I can find it and I will pop it in the show notes. But this is evidenced because in order for NPD to exist, they need to be able to manipulate other people to give them the resources they need to feel valuable. And that is adoration, silence, compliance, and maybe even a placeholder for their own anger as well.
And even if
So,
it's not NPD, even if it's narcissistic defenses
mhm.
that isn't able to be diagnosed, they wouldn't
Yeah,
meet
that's
diagnostic criteria. Even those defenses, they are defending against intimacy, connection,
intimacy, connection,
relationships.
accountability, all of the things, imperfection. The minute somebody is trying to always be perfect, red flag, run away, because that is somebody who is going to protect that perfectionism at all costs, depending on how high up that scale they are, you know. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Erin, so much for joining me today and
Oh,
having this
thanks so much for
conversation. It's
having me.
been really cool. Wow, my absolute pleasure. It has been so much fun, and yeah, we've rabbit holed beautifully. There's a whole warren like all over the field, and it's brilliant. Drop any questions that you have in the comments to us, and yeah, thank you again so much, Erin. And I guess, as ever, all that remains to be said is take care. Bye.
Bye.